Tara asked me before I began this session what the message was in my talk. And without thinking, I said, "Stop judging yourself, you moron." I'd like to talk about the judge, particularly how we tend to judge ourselves. And this whole idea of the judge is really interesting. And a little story for you. Taking his seat in the chambers, the judge faced the opposing lawyers. So he said, "I've been presented by both of you with a bribe." And both lawyers were squirming uncomfortably. And the judge said, "You, Attorney Lewis, you gave me $15,000. And you, Attorney Campos, you gave me $10,000. The judge then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a check and he handed it to Lewis and said, "Now, I'm returning $5,000 and we're going to decide this case solely on its merits." You know, we're all trying to bribe the judge, the inner judge. You know, the judge is supposed to be impartial, and naturally, the mind wants to sway the judge to our own point of view. So what I'd like to talk about tonight, really 4 parts. Part number 1, here comes the judge. Like, well, what is this judge? Part 2 is the ruthless judge. What it's like when the judge is out of control or when it's kind of overwhelmed with that negativity bias. Part 3, the balanced judge. What does it mean to have a judge that's in balance, where you actually have access to impartiality and wise discernment? And finally, part 4, living with a judging mind. Like, how do you make peace with a mind that is designed to compare and judge and try to figure stuff out? So a little bit about the judge. You know, walking in the woods here a lot, as I do here in Northern Virginia, I often think about what it would be like to have lived here 100 or 200 or 1,000 years ago. And they put a bridge in over one of the creeks nearby, and they were kind of required by law to do a lot of archaeological digs. So it was about 4 months. These archaeologists were digging stuff up, and I kind of walked by every day, and Stone Age stuff. You know, they found pot shards, they found fire, elements of fire, and so forth. So for thousands of years, people have, I think thousands of years, there are people who have lived in these woods alongside the river. And I just imagine, how do you survive when it's really cold? Here in Northern Virginia, it can get bitterly cold. And how do you live with mosquitoes in the summer when it's really hot? Like, how did they survive? How did they thrive? Of course, there were hunter-gatherers and pretty plentiful game, I would imagine. And also right along here, where I live, right on the Potomac River, it floods like crazy all the time. It's one of the cool things about the Potomac River is because it's because it's a floodplain, there's not a lot of building right on the river. So when you're paddling or floating down the river, it looks very much like it may have looked a long, long time ago. You can only see very, very few houses. So because of the flooding, they grew a lot of plants. And the archaeologists told me how that this area north, right up river from Great Falls, because it flooded, the soil was so rich that they grew a lot of their food. The 3 sisters of beans, corn, and squash, and then harvesting a lot of wild plants. And I know very, very few of the wild plants. I've tried cooking up fiddleheads, you know, the ferns in the spring. I didn't master that. But way back when, folks had to experiment. It reminded me how I grew up a couple hours north of here on a farm in Pennsylvania, and we had these wild bushes with red berries. And we were always told when we were kids, those are poisonous, don't eat them. And so I've always been a little afraid of these red berries. You know, something in my little mind was like, oh my God, if I put one in my mouth, I'm going to die instantly. But it really, I was just thinking about that as I was thinking about the judge. Like, how did they know? how did they know? And it was by sampling. You take a little bite, see if you're going to die, or you take a couple bites. And this culture of natural healing began to build up over generations and generations and generations of finding out what plants do what. That's that quality of the judge. So impulsively, you might be really, really hungry, see red berries, and decide, oh, I'm going to feast on these things. But the judge says, not so fast. There's a chance you might die. So a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to balance out and find that wise discernment with a judging mind. And I would imagine that you're pretty aware of your own inner judge. This quality of consciousness that is constantly scanning for danger. It's designed to keep you alive. It's designed to keep you thriving. And so it's always on the lookout for what could go wrong. And we learn this pretty quickly. Our greatest teacher is pain and pleasure. You touch a hot stove, you're not going to touch a hot stove again for a while. And unless you're really awake, you won't touch a cold one either. But we also see it modeled. We see it modeled by our parents and by our culture, telling us what to look out for, what could be dangerous. And you take it on through osmosis. You take it on through behaviors and thoughts and all of that. And a lot of times, the negative, like the negativity bias that we take on, like that scanning for danger thing, is completely unconscious. How many people are affiliated with the same political party as their parents? Just a little example of how we assume this is the way the world works, and we set our lives by that. And so we have this judge, or an inner critic, if you will, that is just out there, sometimes pretty out of control with its capacity to judge and compare. As someone once said, would you go out to dinner with someone who treats you the way your mind treats you? It can be brutal, as you know, this invasive voice of constant derision. And so this out-of-control judge, the ruthless judge, is something we all have to contend with. For many of us, it's very, very unconscious. We just don't even realize that we're looking through this filter of fear and anxiety and self-preservation. But as you start to practice, as you start to pay attention to the natural movement of your mind, quite naturally you really begin to see just how invasive it is. And we pick it up through our parents. We pick it up through our culture. There's the story of two little puppies meet each other, and one puppy says, well, what's your name? And the other puppy says, oh, I'm not sure, but I think it's Bad Dog. We get those messages a lot. A story that Tara tells is one of her classics, so I'm blatantly borrowing it here. She tells the story of a young, very, very young girl with her parents, and they're out at a restaurant. And the waitress comes over and says, well, what can I get you? And she says, I'd like a hot dog and French fries and a Coke. And her father says, oh, no. She'll have the meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a glass of milk. And the waitress looks at the little girl and says, so do you want ketchup on your hot dog? The father is kind of stunned into silence as the waitress walks away, and the little girl turns to her father and says, she thinks I'm real. When we're so full of impressions, we pick up this negativity bias and we just believe this is the way things really work. This is what life is. And we pick up these messages of, you're not good enough, you're not deserving, you need to be different than who you are in order to be worthy of attention and affection. Or we pick up these messages of benign neglect, of, well, I guess I don't matter because no one's paying attention to me. And then we base a worldview on that. Or sometimes even we get the kind of the over positive voices of, the parental voice saying, you can do anything. But then internally you're thinking, well, but it kind of seems like I can't. So what's wrong with me? The judge gets driven in so deeply, and quite often it's just simply, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving. I have to be different in order to get any attention or affection or love. The bad news is all of that is internalized. All of that is the background. And if you really begin to just reflect on how many judgmental, negative voices have you internalized over the years? From your parents, from your family, from your siblings, from your school. Chances are you were good at some things. And chances are, like me, you focused more on how you fell short. So as the saying goes, the neurons that fire together wire together. When you have repetitive thoughts of self-judgment, they naturally, if you think them again and again and again, they harden into beliefs. And then the beliefs become habits. The habits become your character. And if you don't examine that out of control, ruthless judge, the repetitive thoughts that lead to beliefs, naturally you'll become more cynical and you'll start to assume the worst. And then you begin to live from that place, that place of a built-in negativity bias. I saw this on the internet the other day. At the store, there was a big X by the register for me to stand on. I've seen too many Roadrunner cartoons to fall for that one. We don't trust. And why we don't trust is this judge. Now, the judge can be beautifully balanced, but sometimes it is not balanced at all. And we find ourselves run by this unrelenting self-critic. And it's interesting because this is really at its essence, it's the formation of the self. I'm different. Something's wrong. Let me build a story around this, and then I'm going to live from that story. And if you've ever noticed that some people, as they age, their bandwidth of their safety gets narrower and narrower and narrower because that doesn't get examined. It doesn't get noticed or befriended. So unchecked, the mind gets more and more locked in, and we find ourselves more and more caught in this unrelenting, vicious judgment of self. That's the bad news. Fortunately, there's an antidote. A good friend of mine, an executive, busy guy, ambitious guy, a successful guy, told me how when he drove up in his really, really cool, shiny car and bought his first McMansion, he pulled into the driveway and he thought, well, this will show the bastard. And then he realized, my dad's been gone for 8 years. What an epiphany of realizing how much he was caught in judgment. Now, part of it was judgment toward his father, of course, but inevitably the judgment toward self, competing with a phantom. And along with that is an unrelenting sense of more and more and better and better. You can do better than this. You can do better than him. That is its own form of a bardo. It's kind of its own form of a hell state. And what's so fascinating about this buddy of mine is how he moved from that place of hard, kind of aggressive judgment, and then opened to the world of mindfulness. Something in him recognized, I'm not happy. This isn't working for me. And he's done a lot of exploration, but a big part of his exploration has been in meditation and doing lots of retreats and doing study and beginning to recognize the teachings around impermanence, the teachings around suffering, the teachings around self. And that led him quite organically to sit with the dying, and to be there for people who are passing. And the years of his practice and supporting people in that practice has radically, radically transformed who he is and his perspective on life. And he wrote me recently, and he talked about his judge as he. I'm translating it here as it. And this is what he said. He said, my judge used to be pretty hard on me, but now it's pretty much forgiving all the time. I willed it to be so, and it became so. Oddly, I find that I've been more judgmental of others lately, but it's even letting me slide on that. It's lost its ambition and potency. I guess you could say it's become more non-judgmental than I have, and that's a very nice thing. Recognizing the judging mind is at least 50% of the battle, because as soon as you can name the state, you've severed your identification from it. It's like you've just taken off the glasses that you were previously looking through. And then the question becomes, well, then how do you work with a judging mind? And to a large degree, as my friend said, he kind of willed it to be so. And by that, I interpret that as like, as he became more and more aware of that voice of judgment, that he was able to not give it any attention, and it began to lose its potency. And in that falling away of judgment, there's a natural arising of the opposite of judgment, which is presence, which opens you to compassion. So I did a Google search as I was researching for this talk. And I saw this great headline that said, "Crush your inner critic in 5 minutes." I just thought, really? I'm not so sure that's the way to go. Although there are some traditions that have you kind of throw out the negative thoughts, where you just simply say, enough, be gone. But I've tried that, and I've only had marginal success, here and there. One of the elements that the Buddha spoke of is when you're in touch with something like the inner critic, or something that's between you and feeling free, one is just notice it and name it. Sometimes just naming it, it releases its grip. Another is to kind of reflect on what it's like to offer it some compassion, empathy, kindness. That can help to soften it. Another is to reflect on the karma of it, where you can ask yourself, if I hold on to this, what's the outcome of this? If I let this be, well, what would be the outcome of that? Sometimes that cultivates a shift. And then sometimes, as the Buddha said, you just grit your teeth and you throw it out. And I think, to me, my interpretation of that is, I'm just not going to believe this. I'm just not going to feed this voice. So there's one thing you can do, and there's so many techniques out there for working with the judge and working with the critic, but ultimately what they come down to are these two wings of mindfulness. Calling on wisdom, seeing it clearly for what it is, and calling on loving presence, calling on empathy, compassion, and kindness. So one approach, and I kind of like this one, is take your judging thoughts to court in front of an impartial judge. Like, imagine you're going into a courtroom, you've got an impartial judge, one that's not taking bribes, and just lay out the case and explore what that's like. Recently, I've been thinking again about a big creative project, a writing project, and And I'm aware that there's something in me that's excited about it, and there's something that's not so excited about it. And so I thought, I'm going to do a little investigation here. And what's between me and feeling really, really good about this project? And what sort of arose is this belief or thought, more of a thought. I'm not confident I have the creative chops to do a big writing project. So, well, that's interesting. I've certainly encountered this one before, but here's a thought of judgment. I don't have the chops to pull this off. So I imagine myself standing in front of a judge, one that can't be bribed. And I use these questions, which have been so beautifully popularized by Byron Katie. You identify that thought, you identify that belief, and you ask yourself, is it true? Do I really know that to be true? Is it true that I don't have the chops to take on a big writing project? I don't know that to be true. That's kind of a crack in the wall there. The next inquiry is, well, what's it like when I believe it? And what I find helpful with that inquiry is like, well, what's it like inside when I believe it? Like, how does my nervous system hold that judgmental thought? So when I investigate that, like, what is it like inside when I really believe that I don't have what it takes to do a big writing project? Well, it's tight, it's small, it's sort of crushed, it's a little pathetic. It's very much of a sense of like a little child who doesn't have the strength to play a sport or something like that, Helpful to take time to really be with that, because there's a lot of juice there. That feeling of what it's like when you believe it. And I can totally get the whole story around that. And then ask yourself, well, who am I without that thought? Like, who am I if that's not true? And then hang out with that. And as I sat with that, I thought, you know what? There are a couple things I know. I'm a good enough writer to know I'm not a gifted writer. But I know I'm a competent writer. I've done like 500 Dharma talks. I've been writing for decades. And I thought, you know what? I got a friend who wrote a really horrible first draft, and then he got a really great editor. And that ushered in a whole new career for him as he kind of found that. And I realized, I could absolutely do this with the right help. I could absolutely have the chops to do this. What a powerful shift from an unexamined thought. I don't think I've got the skills and the chops to pull this off. And then really bringing it in front of an impartial judge and really looking at it closely. It's a pretty juicy shift for me. So what I'd like to do, if you're up for it, is to lead a short little reflection and just a sense if there's anything you might want to take in front of an impartial judge. So if you like, you can close your eyes, and I'll take you through these questions and give you a little bit of time to kind of reflect on them. But what I'm going to do initially is give you a little bit of time to kind of reflect on what you might like to explore. So if you would, you can close your eyes and take 3 slow, deep breaths right now. And it's really helpful to think of something very specific, a really specific instance of something that's between you and feeling really good. And take a few moments to kind of go through your files and sense, is there something you might want to spend a little bit of time with? Something that's between you and feeling really happy. Now this can take some time. It's not a perfect process. And the timing may be a little bit off for you, but you can get a sense of what it's like to go through this. And if you're observing this after it's online, you can pause any point along here. When you think about this particular issue, that's between you and feeling good or feeling really, really happy, you might take a moment to kind of bring it a little closer. Can you create a visual representation in some way? Can you see it in your mind's eye? Some can, some can't. A still image or a moving image. Are there any sounds or words or tone of voice that you associate with this? Again, some can do this easily, some can't. That's okay. And primarily now, let yourself begin to just sense what it feels like inside when you think about this issue. Can you locate it on the inside? You might bring your hand there, just to let it know you see it. And this next question takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of drilling in here. Is there a sense of what you're believing? Is there a dominant thought that you have? A sense of maybe some judgmental thought or belief that you can discern here. And we'll take a few moments. And you might imagine that belief just written down on a piece of paper. So you can see it clearly. Kind of clarify it for yourself. And then imagine yourself standing in front of a judge, a kind, wise, impartial judge. And let yourself explore the following questions. Is this thought or this belief true? Do you absolutely know it to be true? Hopefully you may sense a little bit of crack in the wall. It may really feel true, but do you know it to be true? And you might now ask yourself, when you think this thought, what's it like on the inside? How does your nervous system hold it? And again, you might bring your hand to where you feel it the most predominant. What is this like on the inside when you believe this? You might find it helpful to kind of exaggerate that feeling, or maybe take that feeling and bring it up as an expression on your face, so you might sense it a little more intimately. Do you have a sense of how old this is? Can you trace this back? How old is this feeling? How old is this belief? And you might just sense if you could bring a little loving presence to it, a little bit of compassion to it, and ask yourself, who are you without this thought? And listen. What would life be like if this wasn't true? You might deepen your breath and just sense what may have arisen in this inquiry. It may not be all tied up in a tidy bow, but just to trust you may either get a little bit of insight into this now, or something may arise at another time, a little bit later. And if you like, you can open your eyes. I believe that life and in particular, spiritual practice is about ascertaining what's real. It's about seeing into the nature of reality. And quite often, when we try to figure out what's real, it's based on past evidence. It's based on our experience. And the question is, well, what if that evidence is false? What if you're looking through a belief system that just is wrong? And that opens up some very, very powerful new possibilities. And we begin to recognize, I certainly have for myself, that here are these voices of judgment that I've just picked up and believed were true. It's not safe to tell the truth. Or I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love, or whatever it may be. The more you look at what you really believe and the more you really examine those beliefs, you begin to see into the nature of the judging mind. And you begin to sense who you are without those beliefs. And that can be really disorienting. To sense who you are without this judging mind. Or without the ruthless judge, but with a wise, compassionate judge. Very, very different world. I am a ectomorph poster boy. In high school, I was a little over 6'5" and about 155 pounds. My whole life, always trying to gain weight, always trying to put on muscle. And, a couple decades ago, I just gave up. I just started enjoying my life. And I'm really, really physically active, but I just realized this body is this is just not anything I'm going to be able to do a whole lot with. And what's so fascinating is all the judgment I had toward myself and my body image and all that is a total reverse now. Because right now, having a kind of a skinny body is like kind of the body that a lot of people want. So it's fascinating for me to see that shift of the old voice of judgment and like, oh, wait a minute, actually, I got a pretty good deal out of this here in the long run. The judge, it's really important to know that this judging quality of mind really is there to serve you and protect you. It's looking out for you. It's scanning for danger. For me, if I want to do this writing project, really what that judge is saying, you're going to need some help. You might need a really, really good editor to help you with this, because the truth is, you're not a gifted writer. You're an okay writer. If I only listen to the judge, I'll never try. If I can bring mindfulness to it, wow, I could actually do something here that could be really, really helpful and feel satisfying. So developing the awareness itself is what helps you to cultivate a highly refined inner judge. A judging quality that is informed by wisdom, but also informed by compassion and loving presence. It's said there are two paths. There's the path of self-improvement, becoming a better everything, and then the path of liberation, the path of real freedom. And when you step onto the path of liberation, when you determine for yourself, what is real? What can I stake myself on here? Where is the true refuge in life here? You begin to recognize what's false, the false refuges. You begin to see all the ways where you try to self-protect and self-preserve they're not solid. We build these structures on sand. When you believe that your body is going to be here forever, that's kind of a false refuge. When you remember impermanence and that this body is going to fall away and everything you know and love on this plane is going to fall away, it can be disconcerting, but it seems to be a little bit more reality-based. And so what occurs through practice is what we can think of as a balanced judge. And can you imagine a quality inside that is truly non-judging, a quality of consciousness that is deeply wise, that's informed by reality, but at the same time is deeply empathic, that is deeply compassionate, a quality of consciousness that's not touched by fear or greed or hatred or confusion. That's available. That lives on the inside. We've all touched into that place of deep abiding wisdom and deep abiding compassion. So everything in this practice is about cultivating paradoxes, finding balance. The wise judge is a quality of openness, but also healthy doubt. Is that really true? If we live in doubt and we're trapped in doubt and we're trapped in cynicism, there are no possibilities. If you have no access to that and you're simply open to the world, well, that can be kind of naive. So the key here is establishing mindfulness, establishing non-judging awareness, because every time you bring yourself back to the here and now, you are establishing the sense of the witness, of your capacity to observe clearly without judgment. And when you do so, you begin to realize you don't have to believe every thought. You begin to realize that the mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. And more, you begin to remember what's true. Not only your meditation practice, but your life becomes informed by recognizing these three fundamental characteristics of reality. Recognizing that this life is imbued with impermanence. That everything that's born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. Remember that. That's a profound shift in consciousness. And the second characteristic of reality, that whatever you hold on to is going to result in dissatisfaction or stress or suffering. The third characteristic, that if you let be or let go, you'll be free. And that includes your sense of self. The practice itself is liberating. It may not feel like it when you're slogging through a meditation, but every time you bring your attention back to the here and now, you're re-arriving in a fresh moment. Every time you cultivate non-judging awareness or mindfulness is a moment of freedom. So investing into the meditation, even when you don't want to, is part of the trick. As one great teacher said, after my entire life of meditation, not once after a meditation have I thought to myself, I shouldn't have done that. So here we are living in uncertainty. Someone said recently, the dumbest thing I did last year was to buy a 2020 planner. In that confusion, we so quickly turn against ourselves. Instantly. Saw this great little thing. I saw a girl carrying a hamster. So I asked if I could pet it, but it was actually a corn muffin. So I'm on my way to jump off a cliff now. That's how quickly it happens. So it's just as quickly as we get caught in this judging, self-critical mind, we can have moments of peace, moments of clarity, and perhaps even moments of liberation. So I'd like to close with a little reading, and then a short little reflection. If you like, you can close your eyes. First, the reading. A novice once went to Abbot Macario to ask his advice on how to best please the Lord. Macario said, "Go to the cemetery and insult the dead." And the brother did as he was told. The following day he went back to Macario. Did they respond? Asked the abbot. No, said the novice. Then go and praise them instead. The novice obeyed. That same afternoon he went back to the abbot, who again asked if the dead had responded. No, they didn't, said the novice. In order to please the Lord, Macario told him, do exactly as they did. Take no notice of men's scorn or of their praise, and in that way you will be able to build your own path. You might take a few moments, feel the breath, and imagine for a moment who you are if praise and blame had no impact on you. Sense the path that arises for you. What would you do in the absence of praise or blame? And you might, in your own way, sense the possibility of what it would be like to have the judge as an ally rather than as an enemy. You might sense how this quality of comparing and judging and figuring things out can be a wonderful servant. And to sense how every moment that you can call on mindfulness, every moment you can open to non-judging awareness, to empathy, to compassion, to the mystery itself, you're opening into this field of infinite possibility. As you're ready, you can gently deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. I hope you found this helpful. Learning how to develop this understanding of our capacity to get lost in judging ourselves can lead to all kinds of new possibilities. And we'll explore next week what it's like to work with the mind that judges others, even when they deserve it. May you have a wonderful, non-judging time from here on as best as you can. Remember the power of the practice, how as easy as it is to get caught, one breath and re-arriving can open up again new possibilities. Thank you so much, and many, many blessings in your practice.